and welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody who watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, did the social media stuff. Yep, very, very much appreciated. Haven't caught up with all of the comments from last week as yet, but I'll obviously do so as soon as possible. And there were a lot of comments. You know, some were quite surprised that doing an episode of the show on one of the Axis of Evil distilleries, but you know, you always have to sort of reappraise every distillery. I mean, you know, not just the sort of distilleries that you're not much of a fan of, because things do change over time, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Well, sometimes they just don't change at all, and in Deanston's case, no real change there. So anyway, that was last week. So on to this week's episode of the show. As you can see from the title page, we're looking at the Swiss distillery Langatun. Big fan of Langatun, have been for a number of years. I think this is the third episode of the show I have done on Langatun's range, although the last episode of the show was quite some time ago in actual fact, episode number 300, back in February of 2019. So I thought, long overdue another look, and Robert from Highfern kindly sends me samples on a regular basis when he brings over new bottlings. So a big thank you to Robert for the samples for today's episode of the show. And well, you know, let's talk Swiss whiskey. Although I've obviously done episodes of the show on Langatun in the past, I'll just give you a brief sort of rundown of the history. So it all began in 1857 with a chap called Jacob Baumberger. Now lots of Swiss words are going to be coming up, so I'll probably murder the pronunciation, so no rude comments please. So basically he returned to the sort of the family farm and decided to set up a distillery, as you do, you know. I mean, I can't imagine farming being a great deal of fun personally. Not my bag, as they say. So yeah, set up a distillery. Why not? And apparently this was quite, you know, went pretty well. And so far, and then in 1863 opened the Mühenthaler Marti Brewery. Told you there were some Swiss words involved in today's episode of the show. And over time, both businesses, I believe, sort of were pretty successful. Jacob Baumberger the first took over after the original Jacob Baumberger died in 1903, and then he was followed by Hans Baumberger the second in 1937, who basically steered the company through the sort of like you know, the post-war years, and obviously. I don't know whether other countries were the same during the war years, but Switzerland certainly banned the distillation of spirit made from both grain and potatoes. I think Netherlands did as well, I think. It was basically because obviously these items were required for food rather than sort of, you know, the luxury of turning them into alcohol, I suppose. But for some bizarre reason, the Swiss didn't overturn this ban on distillation until 1983, I believe. No, sorry, 1999, which seems an inordinately long time to sort of, you know, ban the distillation of grain and potatoes. But, well, there you go, that's the Swiss for you. They are a bit... No, I'm not going to make any comments about the Swiss. So, anyway... Basically, it carried on making beer, I believe, throughout this period of time, and then obviously come the sort of repeal of the distilling ban. Jacob the Great, Hans Baumberger the Third, ooh, lots of Bambergers, decided to basically, it was time to start distilling again. And by this time he'd sort of helped set up another brewery called the Halsey Brewery, which I believe is now called 49, a premium beer. Why didn't they keep the original name? much more interesting name. Anyway, they kind of like allowed him to set up a Holstein still in the corner of the brewery and just kind of let him get on with it, and he tinkered around, I suppose, and started distilling what was to become Langatun whiskies. So the first release of said whisky came in 2011 after he basically, it set the still up in about 2005, so you know, matured the stock for a reasonable length of time. And this is one of the things that I've found with Langatun that kind of sets them apart to a certain extent from a number of other European distilleries, is they allow their spirit to get mature, or mature enough to drink, so you know, you're not sort of going, oh my god, that's incredibly fainty. I mean, even so, they are bottling their stuff at a relatively young age. Most of it is sub 10 years of age. But, you know, like I said, I really enjoy or have enjoyed, I should say, pretty much all the things that they've done. Anyway, so basically the Bamberger family have sort of eventually sort of got to the point where the distillery was, and Langatun itself was becoming so popular that they were just running out of room. So in I think it was 2011, they moved to a new building, which was the 400-year-old Kornhus in Argewagen, oh god, somewhere else in Switzerland. I'm not going to try and, I can't pronounce that word. I give up on that one. Anyway, so yes, they moved to sort of like, you know, a more fitting environment. Obviously, I would imagine the building is a lot bigger than the previous building. It allowed them to obviously increase production and all that kind of stuff. Subsequently, the company has been sold by the last Bamberger to run the company, I believe in 2008, to three guys, Christian Lorper, Christoph Neufeller, and an interesting guy by the name of Dr. Dolf Stockhausen. Now, his name may well be a bit familiar to you, the Shakespeare quoting Dolf, who took some rather dim view of my review of his other project, The Seven Seals, if you remember all that sort of accelerated maturation business. Yeah, and the secrecy surrounding it, and then they weren't particularly, like I said, he wasn't particularly impressed by my review of said whiskey, but don't think he's going to have any problems today. I hope. Anyway, let's just take a look at today's one. Right, okay, so we're going to kick off with a brand spanking new release. This is the Monbazillac Finish, so 6 years old, distilled in October of 2006, bottled in January of this year at 49.12%. All today's whiskies are bottled at 49.12. Interesting choice of ABV, it has to be said, but obviously non-coloured, non-chill filtered, all that kind of stuff, so done the right way, as they say, unlike Seven Seals. Ooh, did I say that? Anyway, so this, as you know, the distillery tends to use, certainly for its unpeated spirit, ex-Chardonnay casks, and this is no exception. So this spent 61 months in ex-Chardonnay casks before spending the final 14 months in ex-Monbazillac, which, for those of you that don't know, is a sweet wine from Bordeaux. Bottling number 2 is the Chateau Kefraya Comte Finish. So again, doesn't carry an age statement. This is the third batch of this particular whiskey. It's a single cask bottling, cask number 46. Again, aged in ex-Chardonnay casks before being finished for 2 years in casks that came from Chateau Kefraya in the Lebanon. So this was distilled in 2013 and bottled in February of last year. Number 3 is their Jacob's Dram bottling. This, again, single Pinot Noir cask, so wholly aged in Pinot Noir, cask number 596, distilled in 2015 and bottled in 2021. Bottling number 4 is another new release. This is the Rioja Matured, so like the Jacob's Dram, wholly matured in an ex-American and French oak Rioja casks. So distilled in April of 2017, bottled in June of this year at 5 years of age. Now, one thing I have found with the Langatun ranges now, that when it first came out, now you always sort of think when you get a whiskey from a non Scottish distillery, you want it to say something about itself, whether, you know, something about the area, the sort of style of the spirit, all that kind of stuff, because people invariably ask you when you sort of say, look, here we have, you know, a spirit from Switzerland or the Netherlands or wherever, what's so different about it? And with Langatun has a really distinct, what I call almost kind of Provençal herbal character. Really works well with wine casks and sherry casks, and doesn't generally, as a rule, tend to seem to become overwhelmed by the cask that it's matured in. So hence why they do these particular bottlings. On to the penultimate one, again another new release. This is the 6-year-old Madeira Finish. So it spent again 16 months in ex-Chardonnay cask before being finished for 18 months in ex-Madeira, distilled in March of 2016, bottled in August of last year. And the final bottling of the afternoon, I did think about doing the Old Crow because I like a bit of peat, but I kind of thought, well, you know, we'll stick with the cask finishing or cask maturing theme for today's episode of the show. And this is the 5-year-old Pedro Ximinez cask finish. Again, a single cask, number 564, distilled in 2016 and bottled in 2021. So, really intriguing lineup, I think. So let's kick off with a bit of Monbazillac Finish then. Right, okay, so let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Well, first off the bat, plenty of distillery character, plenty of that Provençal herbal kind of character. I would imagine that character is probably a combination of the Holstein stills, you know, the sort of short, fat, stubby things, and probably the Chardonnay cask, I would guess. But it's quite dark in actual. I mean, past Monbazillac finished whiskies that I've had tend to be a lot more lighter, a lot more sort of aromatic, honey, that kind of thing. This is, I mean, you can see the colour. I mean, look at that. I mean, that is dark. It's really grapey and winey. There's a little bit of peat, some tar, dark honey, getting a sort of an almost kind of cognac-y kind of oxidation note, sort of, you know, oxidised apple, bruised apple. Ooh, I mean, that's a bloody good nose. I mean, that really is impressive. And it's impressive not because of its complexity, but also because it's unexpected. Like I said, I would have expected a Monbazillac finish to be a lot more lighter, a lot more honey. This is really pretty serious stuff, it has to be said. A little bit of toast, some clove maybe. Yeah, I mean, that's a serious nose. That's very, very impressive. And let's see what that's like. Seriously intense. Lots of dried grape, oxidised apple, cinnamon, dark honey, barley, tar. Nice sweetness, subtle sweetness, but the alcohol is kind of just kind of keeping that in check. A little bit of spice coming through on the finish, along with ginger, a little bit of almost kind of walnut shell. It's a little drying, it has to be said, right on the finish as that sort of tannins and spices and walnut shell notes come through. But oh, I mean, that's a serious mouthful. Very, very impressive, and just goes to show that, you know, you don't need to sort of play around with bits of stave and sort of funny bits of kit and vacuums and all this sort of stuff. What you do is you produce a bloody good spirit, you age it in good casks, and you age it for long until it's ready. That's the secret. It's not a big deal at the end of the day. Just needs a bit of patience. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Chateau Kefraya finish. Let's see what the nose gives on this end, shall we? Lighter, more aromatic, wouldn't quite go as far as saying delicate, because again, it's got a weight this to the spirit. I mean, I don't know what the production exactly is like, but I would guess that we're not talking a majorly long fermentation, so they're aiming for this kind of weighty style of spirit. Again, that Provençal herbal character is noticeable. Some toasty Chardonnay notes, a little bit, very subtle black fruits. Again, nutmeg, ginger, a little bit of red fruit coming out now. It's got a lovely sort of soft wininess. Balance is absolutely stunning. Again, the spirit has the character and the cojones to deal with the wine cask. I mean, you know, 2 years in it, it's about right. You know, it is, as I always look for, lovely subtle integration of the cask notes and the spirit. Yeah, nice and winey, but not too winey. Let's see what the palate like. Again, a lot of more emphasis on the Chardonnay cask. Getting that sort of appley sort of wininess to kick off with, a little bit of the sort of distillery character coming through on the mid palate, and then it unwinds with some quite spicy sort of red and black fruits. That spice really lingers. I mean, that is a lovely whiskey, and again, it has lovely integration. It has a great sort of a great feel to the whiskey as well. I really like that. I love the balance, and this is what it's all about. It's like, you know, you don't want a whiskey that's one-dimensional. You know, if you're going to sort of finish it in a cask, obviously you want the cask to have some kind of impression, but you don't want it to sort of completely overwhelm the spirit, and that is just stunningly good. Okay, so let's move on to the Jacob's Dram. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Okay, that's heavier on the Pinot Noir and the winey fruitiness, the sort of quite sweet red fruits, aromatic sweet red fruits, kind of puts me in mind of the more sort of aromatic appellations of Burgundy, sort of Vaux Romany, that kind of thing. I mean, wholly aged in the cask, you would expect probably the cask to have more character. But again, you know, you can just about feel and smell the distillery character. That herbal note is coming through, and it's kind of really intermingling with the Pinot notes. Pinot as a wine can be quite herbal, and sort of this certainly it's just kind of like really nicely put together. A little bit of toasted oat, a little bit of almost syrup, but again the sort of the alcohol is keeping the sweetness really nicely in check. Although a little bit more heavier on the wine, I still like the balance of this. I still think it displays some lovely balance. Let's see what the parts are. Now that opens up with loads of distillery character, that herbal Provençal character. And then the sort of Pinot Noir cask kind of comes through on the mid palate. A little tannic on the finish, but the tannins are really soft, quite sort of softly spiced. Red fruits again. That's got a lovely finish to it, a tongue tingling finish. With that little sort of herbal note kind of coming through. The distillery character just kind of like just keeps going throughout the whole palate. It sort of starts with a distillery character, and that's underpinning all of this, and the sort of like the wine cask is just sort of like sitting on top of that as it comes in, sort of like on the mid palate. Love that. Love the progression. I think that's a superb whiskey. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 5-year-old Rioja Matured. Now, I would have expected that to be a lot darker. As you can see, it's quite light in colour. So maybe the Rioja casks haven't added as much as you might think. Well, they have and they haven't. I'm not getting as much wininess as I would have expected. Certainly nowhere near the level of wininess that you got with the Jacob's Dram. It's possibly a little bit more oak. I'm certainly getting toasty American oak, vanilla. There is spirit character again. That sort of slightly Provençal herbal character is definitely noticeable, although it is a bit berried, a bit like the Jacob's Dram. Touch of vanilla ice cream. It's a sort of almost kind of bready kind of character, not sort of brioche if you like, but maybe not quite so sweet as kind of brioche or brioche as the case may be. Yeah, more, maybe a little bit more toasty, aromatic. If you sniff a bit harder, the sort of like the red fruits do start to come out, and I'm guessing it's basically as it sort of sits in the glass, the more of the wine character comes through. But it's an interesting nose, entertaining, it has to be said. It's the sort of nose that you want to keep going back to because it keeps on giving, and you kind of, I wouldn't say you have to kind of work the nose, but you kind of have to sort of give it time. You can't just sort of go, oh yeah, that's so-and-so, so-and-so. You have to sort of keep coming back to it, and it just sort of starts to sort of, you know, give you a little bit more, shall we say. Let's see what pass on. Again, a lot of oak going on here, but I'm still getting the Provençal character of the sort of the spirit character. Lovely creamy oak, soft vanilla, touch of dried fruits, sweet dried fruits, red fruits, a little bit of almost tea leaves, stewed tea leaves, almond, touch of toffee as well. It's all really subtle, and you kind of, I wouldn't say you have to, again, work the palate. I mean, it's not one of these whiskies that just sort of unloads everything on your palate. It's maybe doesn't quite have the progression, possibly. So I'm just talking at my butt really here when I'm saying it doesn't. Well, it sort of gives you everything up front, if you like, but it's not sort of obvious, if you see what I mean. I'm probably not describing this particularly well. The flavours are all there, and it really kind of like just sort of hits you, but it doesn't kind of overtly hit you with everything. Everything is there apparent, and you kind of like have to sort of pick out the little bits, I suppose. I'm not selling this particularly well. I'm having a bit of a moment with this particular whiskey. All I say is, it might not have the progression, it has complexity there. That's what I'm trying to get at. It has complexity, might not have as much progression as some whiskies, but you know, the complexity is absolutely stunning. I mean, I really like that whiskey. It's got just so much character. And yeah, maybe you can argue that maybe it has, you know, a lot of that character is wood derived, but not a problem. It's got complexity. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Madeira finish. So 18 months finishing an ex-Madeira cask. Dark, I mean, I know it's in the black Glencairn, but it's a real dark nose, dark, heavy, spicy, oxidised fruit, Madeirized fruit, sultana, dried grape, bit of biscuit. I'm really not getting any distillery character here whatsoever. It's finally met its match. It cannot cope with the Madeira. It's well and truly better. I mean, all right, there's a little bit of a herbal note, but I'm really not getting any distillery character at all here. Yeah, it's stonkingly big, and intense and winey and grapey, and doesn't quite have the, well, complexity, to be honest. So see what the pass on. Palate is a little bit more elegant, it has to be said. The nose is kind of a little bit kind of four square. The palate shows a little bit more elegance, but again, we're all about the Madeira. Grapey, winey, oxidised, Madeirized fruit. Yeah, it has some nice oxidative character, it has to be said. But again, I'm not getting the balance. I'm not getting the distillery character. It's just too heavy on the Madeira, and for me, the Monbazillac, if I go back to that, even though it has that darkness to it, it has a superb balance. This, on the other hand, not really quite floating my boat. Right, okay, so let's move on to the final bottle of the afternoon, and yes, it is actually afternoon. This is the PX Cask Finish. Right, it's quite fresh in actual fact. It's got this almost kind of minerality, which I've never really kind of picked up in Langatun's whiskey, it has to be said. It's got this freshness, but again, there's no distillery character. It's all PX, but it's not the big fat treacly sort of PX because of this kind of fresh minerality kind of note, which I have absolutely no idea where that's come from. It's a little bit herbal, it's winey, off sweet, not overly sweet. Again, like I said, this kind of minerality is kind of putting the brakes on the sweetness, but like the Madeira cask finish, I'm just not getting any distillery character, and it's just a little bit kind of like, all right, it's interesting from a kind of, I suppose, a technical point of, because it just displays this kind of almost, well, not quite salty, but a very minerally kind of character, and it just kind of seems like a real outlier, if you like. Anyway, let's see what pass on. Yeah, that's PX. Thick, winey, treacly. Again, not too sweet, but on the palate, I think it's more about the alcohol that's kind of keeping the sweetness in check. Bit grippy on the finish, quite tannic. Again, no character, no distillery character. It's all PX, and frankly, it's a bit dull, really, at the end of the day. Nice spiciness on the finish, but when you've got such a sort of wide variety of bottlings that are available, that just basically just is not exciting at all. You know, it's a sherry monster at the end of the day, and yes, there are people that enjoy sherry monsters, I understand that, but from a technical point of view, it's the least interesting whiskey in the range. So yeah. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Firstly, big thank you to Robert from High Fern for the samples for today's episode of the show. And although I wasn't a big fan of the last two, overall I am still a big fan of Langatun, it has to be said. I love what they're doing. They're certainly doing things in the right way, in my personal opinion. The balance at the end of the day is what I'm looking for, and certainly the Monbazillac Finish just had it in spades. That the balance was absolutely spot on, and what made it more interesting is that it was not what I was expecting, and it's always nice to be thrown a curveball at the end of the day. Like I said, you can't argue about the quality. The balance was there, progression was there. Brilliant, great stuff. Same could be said for the Kefraya bottling as well. Very, very subtle on the finish, so more about the spirit character. I got a little bit more of the previous Chardonnay casks, and just a smidgen from the wine cask, which is how I like my wine finished whiskies. You know, that's what I want. You know, I don't want it to be completely overladen. Nice balance, again, really very, very good. Jacob's Dram, okay, yes, slightly more heavier on the wine cask, but again, the distillery character was evident. It kind of worked in quite nicely with the Pinot Noir, and I suppose to a certain extent almost kind of emphasised the slightly more herbal character of the sort of what Pinot Noir can actually show. But again, I think sort of overall the balance was pretty good. I still got some distillery character underneath all of that, so you know, one was a happy bunny. No, I did kind of sort of almost lose the plot with the Rioja Matured. A great whiskey, I love it. You know, all right, like I said, doesn't quite have the progression, does kind of almost unload all at once, and you kind of have to pick through things, but it's not a sort of a monstrous kind of like, you know, throwing everything at you and just screaming at you. It's kind of got subtlety, it's got sort of elegance, and complexity, and it's a whiskey you just have to spend your time with, and you know, figure out what the hell is going on. On the other hand, obviously you have the sort of Madeira finish, which was far too heavy on the Madeira, and finally, you know, something that here comes a cask that sort of like the spirit cannot cope with. I mean, 5 minutes probably in the Madeira cask might have been good for this particular whiskey, but certainly sort of 18 months, that just kind of obliterated any distillery character, and to a certain extent the PX cask as well. And it's not that I'm not a fan of sherried whiskies, as you well know. It's all about the balance. Can't argue with the cleanliness, absolutely pristine, no sulphur at all, as you would like to think these days, you know, with the sort of like the better wood policy that distilleries have. But again, it's just a big sherry monster. And yes, there are people that like those kind of whiskies, but at the end of the day, it's like kind of, what's the point? You know, it's like you know, painting a sort of like a lovely mural on the wall and then just covering over with black paint. You know, yes, you know it's there, but you can't actually see it, so you just go, well, what the hell's the point really at the end of the day? But anyway, on the balance, I love what Langatun are doing, and you know, there are some great whiskies that they are producing, and you know, you really need to sort of like to buy them. They are expensive, I will give you that. The decanter bottles and what have you do kind of make them slightly more expensive, but you know, if you're going to treat yourself to a very special bottling, you can't go wrong with a bottle of Langatun. So yeah, really, really good. Hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the show. I think it's been great fun, and also have to say is good afternoon and good running.